I, as the patient, should have access, all of those records come together. And whether it's a QR code, if I go to you for care, I just simply show you my code. And you're then able to pull up all the records from all those different providers. That's really what I'm seeing as the kind of the next frontier related to the EHR.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode, we're speaking with Kristen Miles, VP of Healthcare Product Strategy at Oracle. And Garry, we're going to get into this one really quick because it's a very interesting concept. I'm sure some people have heard about it. It's the idea of hospital at home. And so we're going to learn about some of the driving factors, the trends that we're seeing with this as it's beginning to emerge, and what are the implications for supply chain in a potentially new world that's going to evolve over the next 5, 10, 15 plus years.
Yeah, Justin, I'm curious to see where this conversation goes. I think about home health. I think about hospice. I think about telemedicine kind of bits and pieces, but I'm curious to kind of pick her brain and see where this Gen X concept is going. So curious to see what Kristen has to say. So looking forward to today's conversation, and bummer we're not with Hayes today, but we'll talk very, very positively about him. So looking forward to it.
We'll be right back with Kristen.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking with Kristen Miles, VP of Healthcare Product Strategy at Oracle. And Kristen, you and I go way back. I'm going to let you talk about your background since I last saw you in our college days. But we're going to be talking about hospital at home today. And this is the first time we've had this conversation. And we hear a lot about, care moving into non-acute settings or surgeries being done more and more at surgery centers. But getting right into the home, this is going to be an excellent conversation around the impact for healthcare supply chain. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, so maybe don't talk at all about my background. Let's focus on yours.
It's coming.
Kristen, why don't you talk about your career and don't go for any of Gary's bait on what I was like at college.
No guarantees on that, Justin, but I'll at least start with my professional career and then we can talk about your college days. But I started at Maine Medical Center here in Maine and worked in the operating room and really got to see kind of behind the scenes and work with patients, and somehow ended up implementing their ORIS system and ended up with, it was Pisces at the time. And at that point, I think Maine Med was on the kind of leading edge of, hey, what do you do? How do we bridge the gap between clinical and operational resources? And so I went over to supply chain and I've spent the rest of my career there. So worked at Maine Med in the back office, purchasing, contracting, value analysis, all that exciting stuff. And then went to work at GHX, where I ran the supplier and provider consulting practice for about a decade. And now I'm at Oracle, working with our healthcare providers across the globe and working with them to really make sure that our supply chain applications represent the unique needs of healthcare. It's exciting stuff.
That's so interesting. I used to work for the Maine Medical Center PHO too, and I think that all got merged up under Maine Health, did it not?
It is all one giant Maine Health entity, let's call it. It's a small world. I don't remember passing you in the hallway though.
No, I was on Congress Street. I had like a small office that we had on like the 5th floor of a building.
We
right
call
there on
those
Congress.
cubicles, Justin. Those small offices.
Well, yeah.
Cubicles.
It's more of a shared office with 3 people that had cubicle looking. Okay, yeah, it was a cube. For anybody who's not out there though, just because we always like to talk a little bit of fun stuff too. Portland is, if you're a foodie, the city of Portland is one of the places that you absolutely have to go.
Couldn't agree more with you. Like, it's considered one of the foodiest cities in the country, right? Lobster. I mean, do I need to say anything else?
Will you eat lobster outside of Maine, or is that like a strict no-go?
That is a no-go. Nope.
I got to tell you, me too, until literally 2 weeks ago, I had lobster in Tampa at Ocean Prime. And I will say, if you're in Tampa at Ocean Prime, you can 100% deviate from that rule. It was amazing.
We'll ship our lobsters anywhere.
Yeah, this is wrong. You're bringing this up because Justin, being the nurse that you are, we'll go have lobster with Kristen, but bring your EpiPen. Yeah, it happened. I had the hitch moment, blew up the whole deal, shellfish allergy, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me! No crab, no lobster, and so bring the Benadryl, bring the EpiPen. It's a pretty amazing sight when it happens. Really big, fat, hitched lip. Looks really, really good. It's really, really interesting.
It's unfair. So, it's absolutely unfair.
I've been cheated. That's right.
So sorry.
Okay. All right. It's all good, Kristen.
So, we kind of teed this whole episode up by talking about care moving out of the hospital. And we gave a few different examples, but what makes this episode so unique is we're talking about delivering care in the home, but not in the way of like home health or hospice, which I actually have some experience in. I did home health and hospice. We're talking about moving acute care into the home, correct, Kristen?
Correct. Yes. I would say we could call it post-acute care, right? So post-surgery, but truly receiving medical care from the acute care provider. Yes.
So what are some of go ahead, Gary.
No, Justin, we're asking the same question. We probably say at the same time, Jinx, you're at, but what are some of the examples of some of those procedures being done in home? That's where you were going, Justin.
So imagine that you have a patient who has an infectious disease, right? That really they're safer and everyone else is safer getting that care at home and being able to receive IV treatments, those kinds of things, doing that in the home, monitoring vitals, those kinds of things. Also thinking about infusions, treatments, therapies, being able to take any of those things where you're in the hospital for monitoring or somebody needs to make sure that they're okay, but we're going to keep them as an inpatient, really being able to start to slide those folks out and back into their home. They're more comfortable. They get better rest. I'm interested to start to see studies that show the outcomes of that.
My brain is going 100 miles an hour. I'm thinking about like dialysis. Like, can dialysis at some point in time be done at home? As long as the setup's right and you have everything and you talk about cleanliness and the environment and proper protocol and proper procedures. I hope I'm tracking. Am I going down the right road with you, Kristen, on this?
Absolutely. You definitely are. I think in my mind, that's where I start to see this going as well, allowing for, meds to be titrated remotely using IoT enabled devices, but also monitoring the health of the patient through, again, IoT enabled kind of patient monitoring, blood pressure, heart rate, respirations, those kinds of things as well, but not needing a nurse right there all the time.
This is getting me fired up a little bit. The dopamine's kicking in, but I think about like our elderly population, and I'm just going to use my example of my mom in a walker and some O2. And I'm like, being able to do this stuff at home, being able to like pack her up, get care, get transportation, get them there, get them checked in when they can do it in the privacy and the comfortability, the psychosomatic issue, the mental like relief of not having to do that seems very like realistic to me and just a great direction. So,
well, if you've heard of I think there's the dementia, right? Hospital caused dementia, things like that. As patients are recovering, that we see their mental status decline as a result of being kind of out of their element. And it inhibits their ability to receive therapies and truly make progress. It can set them back weeks and months. So being able to allow them to be with their loved ones in their own home, but still receiving care. So not just sending them home without what they need, but sending them home earlier.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the statistics too, because there's a lot of factors in the hospital, with all the machines going off and nurses having to wake people up and moving around. Like, people don't necessarily rest in that acute setting because there are other patients around that also need care. And I can even, to your point about being pulled out of your environment, my grandmother had some dementia, but they ultimately had to move out of the home that my grandfather built for them because he was no longer physically capable and she couldn't support. So, he had multiple strokes and he was kind of the memory and she was the one who could talk because he was so aphasic. And together it worked pretty well. We moved them into a nursing home / assisted living facility, and she had cancer in 3 months and passed away in less than a year. And she had always said, I don't want to leave my home. And so I think there's absolutely something behind people being in that comfortable, familiar environment that is going to help promote healing, provided that it is, in fact, a healing environment. And I won't go into my home health stories, but what you kind of alluded to there, Garry, is definitely going to be one of the challenges. But before we get into challenges and maybe even defining further this concept of hospital in the home, what is the real driving factor here? Because I know you talked about technology. That's going to be a critical part of our conversation. But why? Is there something reimbursement related? What is really making this move?
Well, I think it's a couple of factors. One is just the pure shortage of clinical resources, and we need to be able to do more patient care with less clinicians. I think if you look at the rate of folks being admitted into schools and post-secondary kind of education for nursing, those numbers are just not able to keep up with the number of nurses retiring, right? Tends to be an older population. And so we really are struggling just to get nurses in the door. And when I say nurses, whether that could be a nurse practitioner or just an RN, and not to just say it's just an RN, but, folks of all different clinical backgrounds being able to provide the care, that coupled with having no hospital beds, truly having no beds, and having really sicker patients, an older population. So the number of patients are increasing while the number of care providers is dropping. So I think that really becomes a huge piece of this. And we're all really understanding that a hospital is no place to be long term, right? And even by long term, I mean, even a few days. Like, you can develop hospital acquired dementia in less than a week. So we really need to take a look at where we're providing care, and the technology is coming along so that we can do that.
That's a really good point too. The impact of anesthesia, can induce some dementia, but then to be out of your element while you're dealing with that post-surgery is a pretty big, I'm imagining those will be some of the things that will be coming out in studies around, hey, can we diminish the impact of memory loss? And is it only short term, or are we impacting long-term effects of that as well? And that creates stress, and stress on the body also impacts your ability to heal and recover from, and not everybody's going in for surgery either, but from whatever the illness is that brings you in. So what are some of the challenges? We alluded to what I have a hunch is really going to be, is the home environment conducive to healing? But that's, I think, for a lot of people, the obvious one. Certainly elaborate on that, but I'm sure there are some other challenges to the model. And historically, I'm sure it was technology. But the technology is bringing us to a point where this is a more realistic possibility.
Yeah, I think, that yes, the technology is coming along. The home environment, a couple of things with that. Is it clean? Do you have the caregiving, right, to be able to bring them home? What is their proximity to get them truly acute, to truly acute care, right? So being able to say, how quickly can I get you to a hospital if I'm monitoring and things go south, right? That's going to be a key. So I see this not being as optimal in, say, a rural area that doesn't have an acute care center nearby. Although that's unfortunate, and hopefully we'll make changes to the care delivery model such that we really can get acute support in those rural areas, because it is truly those rural areas that are struggling even more, right, than our urban areas.
How about these moves to the EHR, right? The electronic health record, and the fact that the Affordable Care Act has hospitals and the acute health systems kind of branching their tentacles out into the community and having these non-acute and emergency centers set up. Is that another thing that makes this sort of doable? Because if somebody weren't doing well at home, that whole triage of getting them back to an acute setting and out of the home, if it was all a bunch of disparate health systems, that would sort of fail the patient, wouldn't it?
It would. I think that's one of the reasons why this push that we're seeing with technology companies to unite the patient record, right? And truly make the patient the owner of the record. So if I receive, service from an Epic shop or a Cerner shop or an Allscripts shop, doesn't really matter, or even a small local company that has, handwritten EHR, not EHR, but handwritten records. I, as the patient, should have access. All of those records come together, and whether it's a QR code, if I go to you for care, I just simply show you my code, and you're then able to pull up all the records from all those different providers. That's really what I'm seeing as the kind of the next frontier related to the EHR.
It's so interesting because we had coffee and you explained that to me, and I don't think I understood it the way I just understood it now. And I think it's because it's in context. If the patient doesn't own the information, it makes it very hard to almost be interoperable in the way that the information is shared, because it becomes proprietary to the health system, which could be disparate in a certain community and some more than others.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I did see the light bulb just go off on your face when I was talking. So I kind of go, oh, he finally gets it, which is great.
Yeah.
That would have been the glare off of Hayes' head if he was here, probably is what that would have been. I mean, probably Hayes.
Poor Hayes, he's not here. Can we cut this clip and send
God bless you, Hayes. Miss you. Miss you. No, Kristen, I want to ask another question, take it a step further on this. I came from the world a little bit of intraoperative neuromonitoring and like spine cases where someone was doing a read in Nevada when the case was being done in, say, Maine, and then the whole telemedicine piece. And I'm thinking about this, like you've got a person at home, if they have some type of Wi-Fi or some type of technology where they can read that. Are we seeing where they're going to be reading this at some facility and monitoring this in a telemedicine way, in a read way? Like that's where they're going to be looking at that? Is that kind of directional?
I think so. I think that that's part of the overall program, to say the device that the patient is using, whatever device that is able to be monitored. Now there's two different facets of that. Clinical monitoring, right? So watching the vitals, getting an alert if something falls outside of acceptable parameters, and then allowing that clinician to kind of look across multiple patients at the same time. In addition to that, we're also talking about the monitoring of the device itself for the health of the device. So did the device fail? Is the battery running low? Do we need to send an alert to plug it in? All of those different things. I think what we're seeing is probably Wi-Fi is not going to cut it, given that we really want to be able to reach all patients, and not everyone, I know it still sounds bizarre, but doesn't have Wi-Fi at home. So really looking at more cellular networks, partnering with those folks to start to deliver care. There's a combination, I think, of theories and that people are testing out. Do I just monitor and react to alerts? Can I change the dosage remotely, right? Everything's IoT enabled. Can I up the level of morphine because we're seeing a ton of pain, and all of the signs, the blood pressure, the heart rate, all of those things are indicating an increased pain, along with feedback from the patient itself. I think it would be interesting.
So what implication does this have for specialization in a whole new way? Because what I'm kind of hearing here is, like, I think about we set the table a little bit by talking about moving, especially like orthopedic procedures into surgery centers. And we see a lot of these orthopedic, surgery groups that have just specialized in their turnaround times, procedure times. Like they are so good at it. Does this kind of connectivity allow even like outsourced supplier, vendor-driven solutions to come into the market and really hammer home in some certain areas, that instead of the hospital really trying to be everything to everybody, that they continue to farm out services to specialists that then are able to do things at a national level, at a national scale that we haven't ever seen before?
I think so. Think about hospital at home in a box is kind of where my mind goes, right? So the discharge instructions from the acute care center say, I am sending this order over to some specialty shop that specializes in hospital at home, right? And they gather all that information. They get the patient's information. They deliver all of the equipment. They enable it, set the patient up. The patient then arrives at home. All of the equipment's pre-enabled, and they simply are the people who are responsible for that. It certainly is a cheaper, faster, better way to deliver care, I believe. And I don't think that hospitals they're not going to be great at it out of the box, right? This is a really different way to provide care. So it certainly opens the door for someone to go revolutionize this, get after it first, and then contract with hospitals.
Kristen, just a question. How much is case management involved in like a typical situation like this? I think about the case managers that really run the profile of these patients that are at home. They're a big part of this too, sounds like.
Absolutely. I mean, they would ultimately be deciding, right? What happens to the patient post-discharge? So do they require so much care, that they need to be at a nursing facility? Do they need, can they go back home? What does that look like? What are the services available? So absolutely, case managers, I think, would be leading the charge, as it will, to decide who this is appropriate for.
And you just said, yeah, I was thinking about SNFs. They're so full. I mean, we have so much overrun, and our baby booming population is getting older and older, and they're just going to continue to be full. I've been on several systems where we can't find places. We're looking at everything and anything in between, hotels to motels, whatever we can find a place to get them into for something, develop a contract, because we cannot find places to get them to. So just another great way to take good care of our patients and follow the mission. Justin, as I always say, and it always comes back, it's about the mission and the patient and just quality of life. We got to come back to that, JP.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring one more challenge to it. And this is, I think, maybe a generational consideration of mine, right? So who's going to take care of all these people when they're at home? Because is that something, I mean, again, you just look at who's driving the economy right now, but we already created two income households. So in terms of the caregiving in the home, how do we float that? Who steps up to make sure that this is a possibility?
Like a Hayes Waldrop, who's going to take care of Hayes? I mean, he's right there. He's in that age category. So go ahead, Kristen. I appreciate it.
Oh, that's two.
Yeah, poor Hayes. Again, a place for home health, right? For caregivers that are not true, educated clinicians that would be available. We need to do a better job of providing bodies, if you will, to make sure that the patient is cared for, give respite during, nighttime, so that those folks it is their loved one in the home, but they need rest because they got to get up and go to work the next day, all of those different kinds of things. So I think that challenge can be overcome with unskilled labor, if you will, but we need to make sure that we're paying those laborers appropriately. We're vetting them, really making sure that they are safe to be in the home and the patient's getting the care that they need.
Yeah, you need sort of that. You need to be able to do background checks, for criminal history and all those other things. And you also, to your point, we've seen in healthcare things got with the temporary staffing upside down. And so, you wind up finding somebody who's like, I can make $25, $30 an hour at McDonald's now, way less stress, and I don't have to feel like I have a patient's life that I'm impacting. And so we also not only saw a lot of the clinical, especially nurses, wind up retiring a little bit earlier than we thought, but we knew this was coming. This shortage should not have been a surprise. but it just came on really fast. But then there were other folks that were in those, other roles that were, I think, traditionally not as respected, but still critical to patient care. And they were making $14, $15 an hour. They just started going to Home Depot, McDonald's, et cetera. And that can be a real threat. So you're 100% right. We can't lean on the altruistic nature of, a certain subset of the population to shoulder our healthcare needs anymore. We have to make it a career that has some real benefits to it as well. So I don't want to go totally down that, because that paradigm shift, I think, is, kind of a rabbit hole for this conversation. And I want to focus on technology and supply chain for kind of the rest of it. You were kind of throwing out some abbreviations like IoT, right? So can you define that, just in case there's somebody listening who doesn't know what that means, and maybe some other key elements of technology that are helping make this work, or that are on the horizon that will make it work even better?
Absolutely. So IoT is Internet of Things, which really by definition doesn't really explain a whole lot, but it means kind of enabled devices that can connect to a network and communicate signals back, right? So ultimately you're thinking of, if you think of your Wi-Fi, your Alexa, right? I shouldn't say that too loudly. If you say, your Alexa device that you can talk to, and it's just sitting there and it's super smart and it's connected to your Wi-Fi. Same thing. You can turn on the lights, you can do whatever. These devices would be very similar in that they would have a communication mechanism and be able to, you could turn things on remotely, you can turn them off, you can change and adjust. But that's really what those devices would be. We've made great leaps and bounds to not only be able to do it on Wi-Fi and with Bluetooth, which requires things to be really close together, but also now being able to use cellular signals to tie into like a broadband type program. The other piece that I think is really going to be key is the investments by these tech companies. And a lot of startups are sitting out there, but they'll call it BP in a box or whatever. And it has patient friendly applications that you can download on your smartphone, and you can control who sees your information. One of the interesting things that I've experienced is I was like, okay, I'm going to go start to lose some pounds. Like that's my initiative, my mission for 2023. I went and signed up for a program. They shipped me a scale. The scale is not my friend. I step on it every day, and it sends the weight not only to my phone, but also to my provider. So they know when I'm not doing what I need to do, right? It lets me track it. It lets me do all of that. And not only is it sending it to my provider, but now it's sending it to my phone's aggregated health data. That's not awesome, but it is awesome, right?
It's like sadistic. It's sadistic accountability.
It really is.
Well said, Justin.
But that's just an example, right? That's simple, but that's how our providers are going to know. Like, are we towing the line? Yeah, I'm doing a great job. Sometimes not so much. And this holds you accountable. You got to step on that scale. And if you're not, then they know you're not being compliant.
It's interesting you say that. Just going back to my Maine Medical Center PHO days, that was really my role. I was working as a clinician and they didn't want to say non-compliant patients anymore. So I can't remember what term we used, but it was the patients that were struggling with their treatment regimens. And, that was one of the things, was gathering data, even gathering that data on a consistent basis. A large majority of the population I was working with had diabetes, but as you know, and we're looking out along the coast behind you, I know we're just doing a podcast and nobody can see this, but you have a beautiful background of the Maine coastline behind you. A lot of the people that I worked with were fishermen, and they'd get up at 4 a.m. and they'd be on a boat for 12 to 14 hours. And many of them literally survived off soda because they worked for 12 to 14 hours straight. And that's how they kept their blood sugar up. And this whole idea on a rocking boat, especially when the weather was choppy, of taking your blood sugar was like really not feasible. And so the Internet of Things and personal wearable healthcare tech has some really positive implications for people that maybe aren't in an office environment who have perfect structure to their lives that then, execute and send that information back. And, there were some other things that we learned, but what you're describing is this automated and then the ability to be proactive sort of coaching. And, there's other things like Noom. We're seeing a lot of the algorithms that are being developed for this, kind of concept that you can see it on a consumer level, and it's starting to be brought in, I think, to the provider side of it and being enhanced. Is that what kind of kicked this all off, you think, is the wearable tech?
I do think that, in my mind, that's where it came from, right? We now have our watches that we wear, and it's starting to monitor different pieces. We have the sleep apps that actually can tell us if we're snoring or, if the traffic is happening in the middle of the night. I do think that's where it started. And I think people thought, okay, now what? What could we do next? Right. And then that coupled with, I think, what happened during COVID and the nurse burnout. And we all realize that we are at this precipice of we are not going to be able to provide patient care at a level that's required if we don't do something absolutely innovative.
I was just going to ask you, Kristen, I'm always thinking about cost, right? I'm always like, what is going to be the majority of cost to the end user? Is this, in the supply chain world, I think, is this a purchase services agreement with a new company? Is it medical equipment that I may purchase outright and have at my home if it makes sense, refurbished? Is it going to be disposables that I need to have at my home? A bed? Do I need a certain type of bed? I start thinking about all these things of doing in-home care. What does it look like? Where are we at? Is it all the above? Just your thoughts on that, Kristen, please.
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity to really, at the end of the day, it would be a rental for those hard pieces of equipment, beds and pumps and oxygen, and those kinds of things. I think there could be a purchase service with oxygen companies and the caregivers themselves, right? They are going to need to go in and make sure there's no bed sores, all of those different kinds of things that would need to happen with a traditional home health company. But I also see it being able to, instead of patients do that today, and in many cases, they go out and they purchase things on the internet. They have to go and source these items themselves. I can remember when my parents were so ill that, they were in assisted living and they could no longer provide care. We brought them home and we had to go find a medical company, that could provide a hospital bed, that could provide the different things that we needed. They tried to help with managing insurance claims. They had folks that specialized in that. But at the end of the day, I think there's a bigger place for folks like that. There's also, and there was one game in town, I will say, one game. And by allowing more of this to happen, I think we'll start to see some competition and drive some of those prices down. And I also see insurance reimbursing for a lot more of this.
You know what else is interesting with that too is with the supply chain being driven direct to consumer, which is a conversation we've had. It's been a couple of years. I think it was still in our first season, but talking about that shift to direct to consumer that may be coming. We still have HCAP scores, which is sort of like rating the hospitals and their performance, but the hospitals get supplies from suppliers, vendors, and they don't really get that same kind of rating. When you start bringing them direct to the consumer, to your point, one shop in town, no competition. Well, what about when all of a sudden you have this Amazon of healthcare supplying direct to the consumer? The ratings about the experience and all of that start to come into play where they're really shielded right now, right? It's supply chain themselves that are taking the brunt of it on the front end and trying to fix it with the supplier on the back end.
Yep, I agree with you. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking, the other thing that could possibly be an option too is the hospitals themselves, right? Taking on the responsibility to get these things set up. It ultimately impacts patient satisfaction and also becomes a revenue stream, right? For the hospital that they're missing out on all of that today, right? And they've got these great negotiated prices that they'd be able to leverage to really widen their reimbursements compared to cost. I think the final piece is that if they opt not to, and we do this Amazon like shipping direct to consumer, that drives price transparency. And that ultimately is going to be mission critical to drive down the overall cost of these goods. Today, transparency in pricing in healthcare is non-existent.
Yeah, you're right. And, a lot of times that's another place where I see emerging businesses coming into play because hospitals really only know what they've spent before. So they are their own benchmark in so many ways. And so having somebody come from the outside who specializes in a certain area, say implant spend or whatnot, all of a sudden they have aggregated information on that, which doesn't necessarily create transparency, although it may help with leverage. But we're still talking about two different things. This has been an awesome conversation. I think there's going to be some part 3s and 4s, to this hospital at home because it's so new. And I think everybody sort of understands the impact on supply chain operations. But obviously, if the hospital at home is also being run by a healthcare organization, I got to think there's one really big challenge, which is you don't necessarily have control over par levels. You get a whole new challenge with projecting what your run rate is going to be on certain supplies that are needed to deliver this care in the home. You may not always have a really good idea of what's already in the home. I'm thinking about everybody's little clinic storage and what a challenge that is for supply chain. So I'm going to use that to ask you this last question, and then you can tag on additional answers and thoughts. But what's needed for this model to be successful, especially as far as supply chain is concerned, knowing that one challenge? I just outlined so many others, I'm sure.
So I think that a proper demand planning solution and technology is going to be critical for these folks. They're not going to need to not only understand historical usage and purchases and where all of those products lie, but they're also going to need to be able to bring in future forecasting based on patient acuity, patient census, the diagnosis. And I think over time that those systems refine those predictions and really we'll get to a point where this is very similar to any other kind of business where as long as you have proper demand planning, you'll be able to meet the patient's needs.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that predictive modeling combined with some sort of acuity algorithm is sort of like the baseline for that. To your knowledge, because I don't know this, and I guess I did have one more question. To your knowledge, is there already predictive modeling algorithms out there that take into account acuity when it comes to supplies?
So I will say to you that is definitely something that the lead ERP technology solutions are working towards now. So it doesn't exist today. I will say the top healthcare ERPs are looking to have that in short order.
Excellent. All right, Kristen, great job. You were a fantastic interview. We covered a lot of ground today, so thank you.
This was like my best meeting in like a year. Like, I appreciate it. It was really fun.
That's with
we do have fun here.
Yeah, we do have fun. It's with your old college buddy here, which will hopefully get some rumors later. Appreciate that, Kristen.
And today we had fun at Hayes' expense too, right?
I know. God bless Hayes. We miss him. We miss you, Hayes. We miss you, but we had to have a little fun too. So.
That was Kristen Miles, VP of Healthcare Product Strategy at Oracle, and Garry talking about an emerging concept. We've definitely talked about, the Internet of Things and personal devices that are gathering healthcare sort of statistics or information personally about ourselves. And a lot of people have those wearables. But to really bring this into a whole new arena where post-acute, I don't even know if maybe subacute, getting into that realm, care happening in the home. And honestly, I think everybody knows the driving factors. We have a staffing crisis. So we've got to find new and creative ways to be able to deal with this. And the last thing I'll say, Garry, is I think I did an amazing job of completely steering Kristen away from any college stories.
Oh, I might get with Aaron, our producer, and get some of these in this before we get started. But no, I thought Kristen, exceptional, mind blowing. Like I was going 100 miles an hour in so many different ways. You talked about, we have a labor force issue. We have a SNF bed issue of having enough. We have a patient transport issue of enough of those employees to move our patients. Just thinking about your mom, your older grandparents, the conversations, family members, whoever it is, you're thinking at home, like, why wouldn't you want care at home if you could do it? Think about the ease of being on your own home. I just want to go home and hang out where I feel comfortable versus getting all geared up and having to go into the hospital and get treatment. That is the opportunity, and then we have the technology to do it, and it's a supply chain relief. I think we got huge potential down the road, and I'm curious to see where this goes in the next 2 years, 3 years. It's going to take off, and amazing dialogue with Kristen. She's on the cutting edge of this for sure.
As a Gen Xer, I was really worried about this concept, and not because I don't want to take care of my parents, and I definitely have clinical background, so I'd have more aptitude. But when you just look at who is currently occupying most of the leadership in the workforce, that'd be a lot of demand on our generation. So I was really happy to hear sort of finding new ways to specialize or empower lesser skilled functionality, and to be able to bring, workers into this kind of a concept that, might not work in a hospital environment. And I think we need to take those sort of themes and bring them back into the hospital environment as well. Honestly, we're going to have to get really creative, but this is one way for sure. And it would also decrease the footprint that is needed to care for these patients, and the lights and electricity. Like, even if you just look at resources, so big time.
Your EBITDA gets better all day long with this. Your EBITDA.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode. We could probably have a few more on this topic for sure, and likely will over the coming years. The best way to listen to Power Supply is to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review while you're there downloading the app. Or if you're listening to us on Apple, Amazon, Google Podcasts, you can find us iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever podcast app you're listening to podcasts. Just give us a rating and a review, your feedback. We'd love to hear it. Follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Facebook. We'd love to get your comments and your likes and your shares on all of the content, especially if there's an episode that really resonated for you. We want to hear about it. If you have ideas for topics or general feedback, maybe there was an episode that made a difference for you and you want to send us an email, go ahead and do that. It's info@powersupplymedia.net. On behalf of Garry and not Hayes for this show, I'm Justin Poulin. Thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.